Hello friends, Namaste and Namo Buddhaya. Oh, the moon is getting brighter, fuller. I think we are now Monday. It's Monday early hours of the morning, and the moon, I think, is full moon on the here, and officially, according to our Uposatha calendar, this is the calendar of full moons, new moons, and quarter moons. In the Theravada tradition, is on the 31st of August. So it varies depending on where you are, where you have the experience of the full moon. We're all looking at it at a slightly different perspective, of course, and at a different time of day, relative to where you're situated on the planet, of course. Anyway, I think it's Monday morning, early hours, and Thursday, that will be the coming Uposatha full moon, which will mean I have spent now 1 month, 1/3 of this Vasa, this 3-month retreat period here in Ketohali. And it's going well so far, very quiet. There are just the few monks here with me. One Anagarika, 2 Samaneras. So I'm the only Bhikkhu, although my main monastery isn't far from here. So on the Uposatha day, this full moon coming, and as the previous new moon, and before that, the full moon, when I arrived, I will spend the day at the main branch monastery in Bangalore city. Some 1 hour, 2 hours journey from here by means of a combination of bus and metro train thing. So that's coming up. And what has passed? What has passed has been gone quickly. The Buddha says in one of the chants I repeat sometimes also, a well-known saying to us bhikkhus, because it's a chant addressed to us bhikkhus, is time marches relentlessly on. How well are you spending your time? And this is something we should all contemplate, think about, with a view to arousing a sense of urgency in our practice. There are verses to arouse a sense of urgency in our practice, also in the chanting, that you may hear me repeat from time to time. They are that I have just said, time marches relentlessly on, how well are we spending our time? Also, that we are of the nature to age and get sick and die. Now, I'm not wanting to be morbid and on a bright and fresh, happy, and hopefully wherever you are, sunny Monday morning. I'm yet to see. It's very dark. It's 4:40. I checked the time. I remembered I think the first time ever to check the time before I started talking. It was 4:40 a.m. I've been up for some time. I wake up at 3 a.m. normally to practice meditation until 6 a.m. when I have do some morning chanting or morning puja. It's not really so much puja, because puja is just more about offering candles, lights, incense, flowers to the shrine. This is kind of something that comes from the more historic and traditional, in this country, Hindu faiths, and in Thailand, whatever preceded Buddhism there. But it is an activity of mindfulness, of thoughtfulness, of contemplation, of bringing to central awareness what our practice is about, and that is respecting, paying homage to the Buddha, not by way of worship or praise, but out of respect for the work he did and his legacy of the teachings, which are the Dharma. The Dharma being the realization he came to of the truth, the Four Noble Truths, he came to the realization of the truth of suffering. And this is what the Buddha teaches, suffering. And, of course, the end of suffering. But in order for us to understand that, we need to investigate and come to through our own experience, how the Buddha came through his practice, which at first was very ascetic and very intense, and too much austerity he found. So having experienced 6 years of ascetic, very austere practice, he realized that wasn't the way forward. That too came from historic, it wasn't called Hinduism then, but similar faiths here in India, where he was practicing this austere way of life. This came from this idea of really suffering in order to, they call it tapas practice. Tapas, if you've heard of tapas restaurants where they have hot, spicy, snacky foods and things like this. Tapas is burning away these defilements. Greed, hatred, and delusion are our root defilements. And the idea of tapas practice comes about because if you, for instance, say, right, I will stand here with my left arm in the air for the next 10 years until it withers away and just becomes bone. And it's going to be, of course, be excruciatingly painful. And there are still people practicing this here in India to this day, standing on one leg with one arm in the air or something like this, or just living in a cave and eating very little. It goes on, it continues to this day. The idea behind this is that this suffering burns away these root defilements. Because I think even back then they realized that a lot of the suffering we experience, well, all of the suffering we experience comes from desire. That is wanting what we don't have, or not wanting what we do have. So desire can also be not wanting something. We also can call that aversion. But aversion is to some extent autonomous from the desire not to have, because aversion has its own momentum, its own energy in the form of disliking. So disliking something and wanting to come away from it, whereas desire is liking something and want to go towards it, for it, to have it. But this desire turns into wanting, grabbing, and craving. The tapas practice of old and still going on was with a view to burning away this desire through suffering, extra suffering, in piling on more suffering on top of the suffering you already have to try and get rid of that desire. Of course, if you have a pain and you give yourself a much worse pain, the pain you already had seems a lot less, doesn't it? So if you've got one of those terribly painful little fingernails things going on that I'm not sure how you describe it, but say you've hurt your finger and your fingernail really hurts. If you really someone stamps on your toe, you'll soon forget about the fingernail pain. But the Buddha soon discovered this was not the way forward, causing yourself so much extra suffering. One should find the middle path, the middle way. And this is after 6 years of these austere practices, becoming emaciated and eating just 1 grain of rice a day. He discovered, or realized, not discovered, it was already there. He realized that this was not the way forward, but to find a path in life, a direction, a way of living that is neither opulent and as he'd come from, living a life of a very comfortable life, some say of a prince, or the son of the chiefdom of his chief of his tribe. However you view it, he had a good life for the time that he was living in, and wanted for nothing, a happy family, a newly born child, and he was a sportsman. He was handsome, fit, healthy, and a very enjoyable life. But he hadn't experienced or even seen and witnessed suffering until one occasion when he saw those heavenly messengers, Deva Duta, they call them. So Duta is sending a message, going out teaching, if you like, and they have Dharma Duta, so you can go out traveling and teaching the Dharma. This is Dharma Duta. But Deva Duta was the heavenly messengers that showed the Buddha that there was suffering that he hadn't seen or experienced himself. And this was in the form of aging. He saw an old man, sickness, he saw someone very sick, and death. He saw a dead person. These were the three, but there are four. And these three heavenly messengers showed the Buddha that we are all brothers and sisters in aging, sickness, and death. We inherit aging, sickness, and death through birth. But here's the bright and joyous side. The fourth of those heavenly messengers was the samana, the monk. And this is what he saw, which inspired him to go out and take on the renunciant life, giving up all he had, his wealth, his fine clothes, even his hair. He did shave his hair. He got some old rag robes, such as this, put these on, and went out wandering with the other ascetics, sadhus or monks, wandering around northeast India, no particular place to go, living from day to day, practicing these austere tapas practices. He had a group of other friends, ascetic friends, whom he was discussing, and many other stories and people he met along the way. We won't go into now, because I'm already going off track, but these practices of austerity that he got into after the 6 years, and he realized it wasn't really bringing him any closer to realization or enlightenment, let's say. He's called the Buddha, which just means awake, awakened. He is the awakened one, the perfectly enlightened one. Perfectly enlightened one because there was no Buddhism for him to refer to. No previous Buddha at that time known of. The Buddha of the previous Buddha's sasana, his legacy, his religion, his Dharma had long gone. So he was starting afresh. He had to become awakened himself. And this is why we call him the perfectly enlightened Buddha. Subsequent enlightened beings, even people who have attained to Buddhahood, are on the back of his discovery, on the back of his realization, on the back of his teachings, as a result of his teaching the Dharma, that Buddha Sasana, this current Buddha Sasana, this religion we are in at the moment. So this morning puja isn't so much puja in that sense of offerings and lighting candles, incense and flowers for that purpose, fire worship and all of this kind of stuff. It is to remind us of what the Buddha went through in his lifetime and honor that through, as he asked, when he was asked how would he be replaced, how would he be honored in the future, he said there would be no replacement. What would replace him would be his Dharma. So there are no statues necessary to worship. Now we like to have a Buddha Rupa. I have a little tiny one here, a couple of tiny ones here. Because as human beings, we need something to sort of direct ourselves to. We could just look in the direction of the rising sun or the rising moon or the setting sun or the setting moon. But this is a continuously moving thing. But during our day, sometimes we like something to look to. If you're a Christian, you might have a cross. If you're maybe, I don't know how it works with other religions, but I do, but I don't want to be misquoted. So we like something. It's not to worship, it's not to idolize, it's not an effigy of a god to be honored. It's just a reminder, a poignant reminder, something tangible we can see, touch, feel, and understand to be a reminder of, in our case as Buddhists, the Dharma. That's all it is. And that's what our puja amounts to. Then, inclusive in that is chanting, and our chanting is these teachings reminding us of what the Dharma is, what the Buddha taught us, this practice. Now, where was I going with this? The full moon coming up. I've been here for this coming now then first month of this 3-month period, and I myself, as a wandering ascetic, have wandered here to this location in India from a different location in Thailand. And I'm subject. I have the very wonderful opportunity to practice here really 100% of the time. This is all I'm having to keep my attention on, is the practice. So I'm practicing, or trying to practice, mindfulness, which is part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Mindfulness continuously throughout my day, about my daily activities, which don't amount to much. There isn't much in the way of duties, being a lone wandering monk. Okay, I have the support here we also of course have the Kapia, who's a lay young fellow, a lay person, whom does the cooking and things like that and goes out and gets the supplies in for that. So there are 4 others here, but I don't have much to do with them. As you know, I've just been in the banyan tree graveyard. I hoped to have stayed there for the benefit of my practice. The Buddha said these were after he'd experienced this ascetic living and he'd found the middle path, established the Noble Eightfold Path that we are to live by. And just to sum it up, of course, he's realized that there is suffering. He's realized there's a cause of suffering. That cause of suffering is desire. It cannot be, and it stems from its roots, the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion. So wanting and wanting, or hating and disliking, aversion, yes? And delusion, being confused, ignorant of these facts that he'd come to the realization of. So, once he'd discovered this was the cause of suffering, then he realized that through his own efforts and extreme practice and good intention, to having realized this, to just simply sit and meditate until he became awakened, he then realized fully the fruits of the practice, which were freedom from suffering, the end of suffering, nirodha, they call it nirodha in the Pali language. So he realized that there's suffering. We all have suffering. That's the truth. These are called the 4 Noble Truths because there's nothing to doubt about that. None of us need proof that there is suffering. However good our existences are, there is suffering, underlying suffering, always there. Doesn't have to be in an extreme and painful way, but we always have, when I say suffering, it's dis-ease, it's unsatisfactoriness, it's that everything's never just quite right. You always need, even when you have the latest, newest thing, there's always a better version coming along. Why? Because marketeers, manufacturers, commerce, industry realizes this human nature of ours is to always have one better, the next best thing. This is how we've evolved through this improvement. There's nothing wrong with this. but it can be identified as suffering. That's what it is. And this is the root of craving. And this craving is insatiable until you realize its cause. And that is this desire resulting from greed, hatred, and delusion. So having discovered that the path, the way, he'd ended suffering in his lifetime. He'd become awakened, but he'd discovered the way to end this suffering wasn't through trying to burn away through tapas practices, this austerity, these root causes of greed, hatred, and delusion, but it was to understand them and to know them. And this is how he came about the teachings of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the way, the succinct and easy to understand way he taught us, and we know today how to live in order to come to the end of suffering within this lifetime. So suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. And this path leading to the end of suffering, called the Noble Eightfold Path, is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. So just those 8 things. Right, as in, it doesn't mean there's always a wrong way to do something, but right speech, for instance, is speaking at the right time, truthfully, kindly, and usefully to people, and speaking from a place of experience, so not hypocritically. No good telling someone to do something this way if you do it another. This is an example of right speech. And right action, just doing no harm. And this is all summed up in the beautiful 5 precepts, just 5 precepts, 5 rules for lay people to live by, of no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or the taking of intoxicants. Just these 5 things. This and the Noble Eightfold Path is all we need to realize, like the Buddha, freedom from suffering in this lifetime. This is the Buddha's teachings. This is the Dharma. This is what we pay homage to. The Buddha, our teacher, the Dharma, his teachings, and then the Sangha. Why the Sangha? Why monks? Well, the Buddha came to the realization that there was suffering through seeing aging, sickness, and death, of course. But then on the bright side, he saw a samana wandering, a monk, free from worry. He seemed at ease. He wasn't attached to worldly material things. He'd renounced, he'd given everything up. Nekkhamma, we call it, renunciation. Nekkhamma in the Pali word, which is one of the 10 parami. It's also comes into many of the other Buddhist lists. But it's a quality. It's being able to let go of, say, this is a phone. I know I can do without that. Renunciation. And we let go of the Buddha, in his case, his entire life, his relationship, his marriage, his child, his nice house, his nice living that he had, to go and practice those austere practices at first. And then eventually he continued as the Buddha, having attained to enlightenment, passing on this message, teaching his disciples, his then growing sangha of other samanas, renunciants, who'd all gone off in different directions, doing all different kinds of these tapas practices. But when they came to hear of the Buddha, came into Buddhism, as it is now referred to, and began to realize that this fully austere practice of tapas wasn't the way, but this Noble Eightfold Path, having realized the Four Noble Truths, was the way to become free from suffering in this lifetime. Now, being direct disciples of the Buddha, they came in huge numbers, and many thousands became fully enlightened, realized And we call them arahants, people who have realized and become fully enlightened to the truth of suffering and realized and attained to freedom from suffering in this lifetime. This is just a very brief description of attainment, arahantship, the fourth stage of enlightenment. Leading to that as sotapanna, the first stage of enlightenment, where is in itself an extremely high level of attainment. At the level of sotapanna, you have, firstly, you have absolutely no doubt, you have full understanding, but absolutely no doubt in the Four Noble Truths. And that's quite easy, really, isn't it? Having no doubt that there is suffering, a cause of suffering, an end of suffering. Maybe one could have some doubt there, but the path leading to the end of suffering. But when you have absolutely no doubt about these Four Noble Truths, this is one part of attaining to sotapanna. And then the abandonment of rites and rituals, by which we don't mean necessarily having chanting and a puja each morning and evening, or even bowing to Buddha statues. This isn't necessarily rites and rituals, but it could be construed as such. It can be as such if you think that that is what will free you from suffering. If you think offering incense, offering flowers, offering candles to a statue is going to free you from suffering and offer you protection, then you are in effect clinging to rites and rituals. If you realize though and see that that is just paying respect in order to bring about extra mindfulness, this is a major part of the Noble Eightfold Path, in your practice towards the understanding of what the Buddha did for us in terms of what he went through to realize this message he's given us of the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, then you're just paying your respects to that, both externally in form, but internally with mindfulness and understanding. And then practicing what is taught, the Dharma. So abandonment, letting go of rites and rituals, lucky charms, hope, prayer, reliant on a higher being. This is rites and rituals, clinging to rites and rituals, superstition, letting go of all of that as part of your renunciation, because many people come to Buddhism from other faiths whereby there are such practices. There are no other religions, so if you come from any religion where there aren't acts of worship and prayer. Buddhism is in itself unique in that respect, where there is no God and there is no need for prayer, as in praying, asking for something. We chant to remind ourselves that we are responsible for our own inevitable either release from suffering in this lifetime or the increase of suffering in this lifetime through not practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So rather than right view, the first of the Noble Eightfold Path is this understanding of the Four Noble Truths and the nature of existence, that all things are impermanent, all things are unsatisfactory, suffering, and out of our control. I was in the banyan tree graveyard and then the rain came. I got a plastic sheet over the branches of the trees to shelter the tent, which I suspected would not be very waterproof. It was just a kind of a toy, more a mosquito net than a tent. But of course, nature is a very powerful thing. So although the plastic sheet was very successful, the rain came pelting down, what I hadn't foreseen was my tent, my mosquito net, my little camp setup was in the path of the water's flow. Now water, if it's landing on high ground, will seek the ocean at the lowest possible level of land, yes? And it doesn't matter what gets in its way, even if it's a monk practicing his meditation, it's going in that direction. So I found my tent all of a sudden undermined by water. So I'd done all of the aspects of protecting from the rain above, not thinking through lack of sense, really, common sense, but you could say mindfulness, that the water, torrential water, would come pouring from underneath the tent, as it did with mud and leaves and bits and bobs. So the water came rushing under and the tent filled with water, so I had to beat a hasty retreat. It was very easy. I just have my bowl. I could put anything that couldn't get wet in my pinda here and the lid on, and then it remains protected. So, for instance, when I'm wandering, traveling, I have my passport or any documents, and if I have a phone, it goes in here, yes, with the lid on, because it doesn't matter how much it rains, this is waterproof. It's a steel bowl. So that's it, all went in there. My sangati, I had to just quickly, I had my yam here, put in my yam and beat a hasty retreat back here to this nice room. So I'm back in this room. Now this is as a nature of uncertainty, things being impermanent. I thought I had a very nice setup there for the rest of this few months, the remaining 2 months of this 3-month retreat period. And I thought even with some rain it would be okay. I've got a plastic sheet over the branches here and tied up with some string. Doesn't matter how much rain comes down, it'll hit the sheet and go off in a different direction. But the rain came underneath, it undermined me. It undermined all of those expectations, didn't it? That's an example of anicca. So here I am now back in this room, and I'm very fortunate I have this room. And this is why the monk, the Buddha, through his experience, said, you monks, you stay in this one place for this 3 months. Because he was here in India, where this is where I am, where this rain does come, and is going to find the ocean, whether you're there or not. So this is the beauty of the Buddha's teachings. It's all based on reality, facts. Now, it may be that you're in a different climate, a different part of the world, but you still have this uncertainty, this anicca that we experience that gets in the way of our practice. Now, this isn't the main thing that gets in the way of our practice, of course. What is the main thing that gets in the way of our practice is these 5 hindrances. And they are also what get in the way of any success we might potentially have in life, because they are the distraction from our goal. They are anti-mindfulness, if you like. They take us away from the direction we're going. They pull us off the Noble Eightfold Path. And what they are, these 5 hindrances, are sensual desire, just wanting something nice, wanting some pizza and chips and some Coca-Cola, biryani and thumbs up, you'd say here, I think they'd say in Bangalore. Aversion, not liking certain things, disliking something about, hatred, you could say. It's too strong a word, because just a little disliking is enough to really play on the mind and take your attention away from your purpose. Tiredness, they say sloth and torpor is the old-fashioned word, but it just means tiredness or even laziness. I'm a bit lethargic. I can't be bothered to sit and meditate. What's to do? You've just got to sit and do nothing, but you do have to sit upright and erect, and you do have to keep your mind on your meditation object for this period of time. Watching the breath. Oh, I can't be bothered to do that. I'd just rather go to sleep, and then all my suffering's gone because I can have nice dreams. You see? But you could be doing that in your tent, and then the rain could come and wash you away. But at least if you're awake and meditating alert, you're ready to run. So we counteract that by just getting enough sleep to suit your circumstances. And then by enjoying your meditation, you don't experience tiredness. it's like a child on Christmas Day morning. They've had little sleep. They've been waiting for Father Christmas all night long. And apologies if you don't know where I'm coming from on that, if you're from a different culture. But most of people these days know these stories. But Christmas, they're all excited children. They're not tired in the morning. They just want to open their presents. And they go all day. And they want to stay out late at night with mum and dad, you know. They've got so much energy. Why? Because it's so exciting. They're enjoying it so much. And this is how we get this invigorating energy into our meditation, by enjoying it so much, not working on watching the breath, concentrating, really enjoying each and every breath, opening our eyes bright and wide to this experience of life that is so enjoyable, so fulfilling, when we look at it from the right perspective. There's only one perspective, and that is the perspective the Buddha taught us. And then there's, how many did I get to? 3 of the hindrances. Restlessness and worry is the 4th. And bear in mind, this is also applicable not just to meditation, but your life in general. Restlessness and worry, this is just really concerning yourself about the past and the future. Worrying about things that have happened in the past, there's no need to worry about. It's happened. You can't do anything about it. It's just memory, unreliable memory. And restlessness about the future. And the future is just imagination. It hasn't happened yet, and it may not. I imagine myself spending the rest of yesterday afternoon, it was a beautiful sunny day, and evening and night, abiding under my banyan tree, as the Buddha said, abide, live monks, you live under trees, in caves, maybe in a monastery for this part of the year. And I wasn't in the monastery, I was over there, so I should have listened. But what's the other place? Or just in the open air. This is where monks can live. And I was abiding in my meditation, and then the rain came. I thought, oh, it's okay. And then whoosh, no chance. Back here quickly. It was imagination. It wasn't reality. You don't even know if you'll live for your next breath. But on a cheery note, we just don't know what's happening next. It could be a wonderful, good surprise you may have. So don't bank on that. Don't get restless about it. Don't think about it, because there's so much to be enjoyed in this present moment, here and now. And finally, doubt. Now, back to the Sotapanna, the first level of enlightenment. You need to eradicate doubt. Doubt about this practice, doubt about these teachings, before you can realize that, before you can attain to this first level. I don't like to get too much into these levels of this and that, but really the experience of Sotapanna is such that, having abandoned doubt, abandoned rites and rituals, you are free to practice and be free of these 5 hindrances that I've just discussed. So this is how everything goes round in a circle with this practice. It's kind of cyclical. You see, if you follow, you understand these noble truths, the 4 noble truths, you follow this noble eightfold path, you find yourself not back to the beginning, but getting closer and closer to the realization of the truth, being that although there is suffering, there is an end to suffering. So it isn't all bleak. Yes, we're of the nature to age. Yes, we're of the nature to get sick. Yes, we're of the nature to die. But if we are enjoying each and every moment in itself, each present moment here and now as it is, rather than worrying about what's happened in the past or imagining what's going to be happening in the future, then we can really be in a place of contentment. And when we have contentment, this is the opposite of having desire. So to have and be fully content, you have eradicated or undermined desire the cause of suffering. Now, I have these 5 hindrances too, and the thought that goes through my mind as we approach the next Uposatha, this full moon coming, I should check the time. Oh, I've spoken for quite a long time already. Maybe I should save this for the next talk, because I've been talking about the sangha, the Buddha, the Dharma, the sangha, but the sangha is, in the original sense of the words, is monks and nuns, renunciants, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, people whom have given up their worldly life and become these robed individuals whom are wandering around here and there. Now, often these days, there isn't so much wandering going on. They are living in monasteries. I'm more of a wandering kind of monk. As you've probably seen from these videos and heard in these talks, I'm moving about quite a lot. And somebody asked me, or compared this to a word we hear, which is, don't know whether I can pronounce it, wanderlust. Not wonder as in W-O-N-D-E-R, wander as in wandering around, W-A-N-D-E-R. This is my language and I'm struggling with it, so I take my hat off, if I have one, and respect those of you whom English isn't your mother tongue, to listen to these talks, because I try to speak clearly, but sometimes too quickly, and well, I have utmost respect for anyone who speaks more than one language like me. I should leave, though, this subject of wandering ascetics, wanderlust, monks, and travel to the next talk, because I think I've spoken enough for today, or for this talk, to be able to leave it there. I hope there is something useful within this. If there is, please use it. If not, just let it go and practice sila, keeping moral virtue, those 5 precepts. Practice meditation. And this way you'll develop your own wisdom and your own method of practice along the lines of the Buddha's teachings within this Noble Eightfold Path. So I only hope to remind you of the Buddha's teachings, bits that I've picked up from my own experience. It is for you to discover yourself and for you to realize the truth of suffering and for you to witness and see the end of suffering within this lifetime on your path towards Nibbana. Thank you for watching.